Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Grow Rogue podcast. Today, I'm joined by Ron Higgs. Ron is a 20 plus year Navy veteran. Now he is in a leadership consulting role. He goes into companies and he helps them to establish structure, make sure that all of the individuals and the teams within the organization are aligned towards a common purpose. And he's got some really fascinating applications that he has brought in from his military experience and he's applying into the private sector. I know you're going to get a lot of value from this. Make sure that you stick around to the end because he gives his number one takeaway that's going to make anybody listening a better leader immediately. So if you enjoy this, please like and subscribe to the channel. And I appreciate you for being with us today. Let's get started. Ron, why don't we get started? I'd love to hear about your background, how you came from where everything was, where everything started to what you're doing these days.
Wow, long story, but I'll try to make it as short as I can. First, let me thank you for having me on. Looking forward to this conversation, and I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun. So, about me, my journey started in the Navy, the U.S. Naval Academy, 17 years old, Naval Academy. Um, Great place to be from, great institution, hard, difficult, difficult place, but it was turned out to be great. Forged relationships and skills there that endure to this day. I chose aviation in the Navy. I was a naval flight officer, so if you saw the original Top Gun, Maverick and Goose, I was Goose, guy in the back doing all the work while the pilot got all the credit. Anyway, so I did that for a while. Then I became and did a bunch of different things in the Navy. I'm a graduate of the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School, got to fly a bunch of different types of airplanes, and made it to the point where I was a candidate to be a mission specialist astronaut, and got to NASA and got disqualified for medical reasons. So that dream kind of stopped in that place. I was an aerospace engineer for the Navy. I did program management and acquisition. So I worked with defense contractors on naval aviation programs, Navy weapon and sensor system programs, and satellite programs. Well, when I got out of the Navy after 20 years active duty, 20 years after the Naval Academy, I stayed in the aerospace and defense community. I had a few jobs there, most notably working for Boeing. So I worked for Boeing. That was the last big corporate job that I had. While I was at Boeing working on a systems engineering team, I just looked around and said, it's time for me to do something different. So I left without a very good plan. So I sort of built my parachute on the way down. I got involved in a couple of startups, called myself a leadership consultant. And what that ended up, how I arrived at that is the common theme in everything that I did in my career was around leadership of technical teams, things like that. Um, I did some consulting for a while. I got a job as a COO. It's just pure luck and networking, and that job was great. Then COVID hit, and I got laid off. So I started as a fractional COO. So I was going out there looking for business owners who just needed some help running their business. I really enjoyed that, and I enjoyed the coaching aspect. I found myself coaching the executive team one on one, and then the executive team as a whole. Found that I liked that a little bit more, so decided to move into executive coaching full time. Now my niche is working with engineers. So if you know any engineers, I'm sure if you know engineers, you may have heard engineers in leadership roles say to themselves, man, I wish I could just go back to being an engineer. Those are the folks that I'm looking for. Why I chose that? I have an engineering background. I I surmounted those challenges, and I've helped a lot of other engineers make it through those challenges into leadership. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm an executive coach for engineers in leadership roles.
I really appreciate that background and thank you for your service as well, Ron. And this is a theme that I have definitely noticed, we've interviewed several veterans on this podcast who are now in leadership roles, and actually a lot of them are now in leadership consulting. And so I'm there's clearly something there, right? A couple of them is a fluke, but this many is a trend. So what about that military experience do you think makes you so well positioned to jump right into a leadership role within a private sector organization?
Well, I think the military is based on structure and leadership, and we develop leaders. We teach leaders. I mean, I went to the Naval Academy. I mean, that was the tenet of the organization since it's been around since 1845, is to create leaders. And in the military, you get thrust into leadership roles at a very at a very young age. And we started at the Naval Academy, leading small groups. And then as you go on to graduate, and go into whatever unit that you're in, you start to lead, and then you progressively move up. So as you move throughout your career, you're getting increased levels of responsibility. And leadership is the cornerstone of all of it. So it's almost ingrained into our DNA. So when we come out of the military, those are the things that we're just wired to do. Now, there's a whole bunch of other things that are important to leadership. And I'll give you an example, like mission focus. So we all took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That's pretty clear. And what the military does is the military does a good job of aligning every single thing we do to that support and defend the Constitution of the United States. So I was able to go out every day. Every day I went to work, no matter what job I had, no matter what I was doing, I was able to map what I was doing to supporting and defending the Constitution of the United States. And that is missing in the real world. So in a lot of places in the real world. So a lot of veterans are able to walk in and see that and look at mission focused and then be biased towards the success of the mission and the success of the organization. So veterans, again, will look at what's best for the organization, what's best for the unit, not necessarily what's best for me. Again, ingrained in what we have been doing through our time in the military, whether it was a short period of 2, 3, or 4 years, or whether it was a career of 30 to 40 years.
Okay, so I can see how one could be really bought into the mission of defending the Constitution, defending your country. You're in a lot of ways. I would imagine I would imagine you'd agree that you're also to a pretty big extent you're there for your brother, right? Your fellow military or Navy members. How do you replicate that in a private sector scenario where many people are there because they're trying to put food on the table, right? There's not as big of a lofty ideal to which everyone can be pointed and oriented. How do you recreate that?
I think that I've never tried to recreate that.
Okay.
Right? We all know, and just a small point, we are all there and we took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, right? And so that's the overarching mission. And it also requires some level of sacrifice, right? And service above self. We're all serving our country, willing to lay down our lives so that people can be free and live the way they do, even folks that don't agree with us or don't like it. Can you replicate that in the corporate environment? No, I don't think you can, but you can focus people towards the same goal. So whether you're there to just get a paycheck or not, right? The success of the company overall, which means accomplishing the company's mission, is inherent to you getting that paycheck. not asking, does everyone need to go above and beyond? No, we're talking about human beings here. And you're exactly right. How there are some people that just maybe don't care as much. It's like, here, I'm just here to make money, to get food on the table until I find a better opportunity, to make more money. But
Mhm.
while they're there, we should all be focused on the same thing. And finding that common ground, I think is important. So I've had people working for me before that you can tell aren't necessarily engaged.
Mhm.
But listen, the more you're engaged, the more successful the company is. The more
Mhm.
successful the company is, the more successful you're going to be, right? Because we have a bonus and incentive structure. We have structures in order to reward people based on how well the company's doing. And so I think, I guess I've never asked anyone to go home and think about work all the time or be that engaged in work. But I truly believe that if everyone is working towards the same goal and we create that success, the more successful you're going to be, no matter what, no matter why you're there.
Um, I got a question. Do you find yourself ever getting frustrated when an individual or maybe a team doesn't have the same level of discipline that you are accustomed to seeing, perhaps in that military background?
Not necessarily. Now, I will say this. During my transition, when I when I got out, there were some certain things that I was used to in the military,
Hmm.
right? I'm used to, especially other military officers. Whenever I had a discussion with a military officer and someone looked at me and says, "Yes, I will get that done," there was no doubt in my mind that that would be done. And there's this inherent trust that we have. And honestly, I got burned a couple of times when I got out of the military, and I got frustrated. But I realized that everyone doesn't have military discipline, right? So in the military, we all have sort of a baseline. We know we've all been through some of the same training. We know what it takes to get to where we are. You can go into a corporate job and not understand what it took for everybody to get there, what the standards are, or anything else. So you have to reset. I had to reset my expectations accordingly. And the best thing to do in this case was to get to know people. Again, once you get to know people, um, I'll back up a little bit. Everyone is motivated by different things.
Hmm.
Different people are motivated by different things. You have no idea what motivates another human being unless you build a relationship with them and get to know them, right?
Hmm.
So, in terms of leadership, you'll have to adapt to that particular person. We all know that there are some people that you can look at and go, I need you to do this. And then when
Hmm.
they walk away, there's no doubt in your mind that it's going to get done and it's going to get done well, right?
Hmm.
And there's others that you look at and go, hey, I need you to do this. You have to check on them. You have to remind them. You may have to hold their hand, whatever the case may be. But you know that. And then your job is to see if you could level up those folks that, exhibit the behaviors that need to be improved, I guess I'll say.
I like that, and I would agree. I mean, we found this over the years that that understanding. We use a term. This is goes back. This is like a sports term that I held on to for years ago, and it was KYP. Know your people, right? And it was each and every person in your organization or that you're working with, because we do a lot of like consulting with our clients as well, and so we're in a situation a lot of times where we're interfacing with their team members and they don't necessarily answer to me, right? So we've got to figure out, well, how can we make sure this person is aligned with the purpose that we've been brought in to achieve? And that you just can't replace the getting to know that person, understanding what their motivations are, understanding how to best align their personal incentives with what is best for the achievement of that overall objective. And I've not been able to figure out a way to do that like in mass, right? Like other than being able to do that on an individual basis, I don't know how to replicate that. And so
I don't
that's
think you
interesting to
can.
say that.
I don't think you
I
can
agree.
in math. I mean, you just can't do that.
Right. Well, I mean, that's why there are leadership structures, right? Where it's not one person, with 500 people that are reporting directly to them, right? There's a reason why that
Right.
doesn't really exist, right? We have hierarchy and layers of leadership, and despite all technological advancements and ways of communicating remotely and working virtually and all that kind of stuff and duplicating the message, it's just really difficult to get past the fact that you need to be able to have some sort of an understanding of each individual on your team in order to lead them effectively.
Yes, I agree. And then let me add this, which something that can help is assessments. I'm a big fan of
Yeah.
assessments. And there are a lot of
Same.
assessments out there, right? There are just too many to choose from. And it doesn't matter which one you use, to some degree, they're all right. Right? So if you can use a very simple assessment, and I'll give you an example. Some people are biased towards action, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some people are biased towards thinking and gathering data,
Mm-hmm.
right? And some people are biased towards, the emotional aspect of it.
Right.
Just knowing that from an assessment to
Right.
go, okay, this person here, you know what? They are one of those people that's biased towards gathering data. Right now, we're in sort of an emergency response situation. We
Mm-hmm.
can't necessarily afford that. So now I need to go to the action oriented person to
Mm-hmm.
go get something done. On the other side of that, right, it's like, okay, hey, this is complex here. Let's go. Who is it? Well, Ron is one of those thinkers. Let's go get Ron on this, right? So you can,
Yeah.
to some degree, right? I oversimplified that, but I think you
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
About assessments can really help in that regard.
Oh, I completely agree. So we internally we've done those as well. We've used a few different ones. We've had clients that use their own versions of the popular assessments and personality tests and things like that. But yeah, it's really revealing because you kind of have a sense, but then when you see it on paper, that's that report and that assessment. You think, okay, well, that the behavior that I have observed now makes sense, right? Because
Yes.
this is, they are kind of in line with this personality assessment, and so it does help you to determine how to best communicate, how to best lead those individuals, and so that's good to know. So is that part of your, if you have one, a specific process when you go into an organization? You start with assessments, or is there some other kind of track that you take everyone through?
I do have an assessment that I use.
Mhm.
I actually work with a business system called Predictable Success. We don't have to go in there,
Yeah,
but you can look it up, right?
yeah, yeah. I've read the
But
book. Yeah,
there's an assessment
yeah,
that's a piece of it. When I first took the assessment, funny story, I rejected the results. I'm like, that's no way. And then I thought about it for a little bit, and I thought about some of the issues that I ran into in my career, and I went, oh man, you know what? That assessment is spot on. Second example, someone else rejected their assessment. Like, no, there's no way. This is all wrong. Okay, do me a favor, show it to your spouse.
yeah,
Come
yeah.
back the next
What
day,
do they
spouse,
say? Yeah,
spouse says that assessment is spot on. It's 100% correct.
right.
That's you to a T, right? And so
Uh-huh.
that's one of those things that sometimes the results may surprise you,
Right.
and it may not be as obvious through some of the traits that you've observed.
That's right. So that's really interesting. So I'm a big fan of the book, the Predictable Success book. Is it Les McEwen? Is
Les
that the
McEwen, absolutely.
Les?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was trained by Les. Les has created a group of predictable success practitioners, and
Yeah.
I am one of them.
Okay, so that is super interesting. I read that book, gosh, probably 7 or 8 years ago, and I have referenced that predictable success curve of his hundreds of times at this point in
Yeah.
different organizations that we've worked with. Just that, what is it? It's the early struggle. It goes to, is
Fun.
fun that, yeah,
Early struggle, fun, white
yeah,
water, predictable success,
yeah, yeah.
treadmill, the big rut, and death rattle.
The death rattle, yeah. It's funny. It's when you understand that it takes 5 seconds to understand where each organization is. At least that's been my
It is.
experience.
It
Yeah.
is very intuitive. One of the reasons that there are a lot of tools for consultants to choose from these days, coaches and
Mm.
consultants, and I really locked onto that one because it was so intuitive. And after a very short period of time, I was able to think back to every organization of which I was a part and identify what stage they were in. Now, his follow-on book, or he's got four total, but there's one called The Synergist that actually talks more about the assessment part of it. And if
Okay.
you haven't read that, I'd recommend that as well.
I don't think I've read that one, so I'm gonna add that to my reading list next. I know I've got the first one on my
Yeah,
best hits
great book.
list
And that, as
somewhere.
a consultant, I
Yeah.
use that quite a bit because once I can identify which one of those stages the organization is in, it really helps me target the kind of support I can provide. And I'm also an advisor to some startups, and I use a lot of information there from the early struggle part to really help in my advisory role with startups.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, speaking of books, you're somewhat of an author, right?
Well, somewhat. I actually wrote a chapter. I was a contributing
That's right.
author to a multi-author book. I
Yeah.
wrote a chapter of a book called The Winner's Mindset, and my chapter was called A Mindset Shaped by Naval Aviation.
I like that. Yeah, you and I, we talked about that in our pre-interview discussion. I had contributed a chapter to a book you had as well. I think it made us both like Amazon bestsellers or something
Yep.
by nature of that book selling well. So as a few, just a couple of Amazon bestsellers, just chit chatting here. When I think that's a good segue into talking about content, right? You have done, I think, really well on LinkedIn, with creating content, putting out content that is, it speaks to these common problems and these challenges that you're talking about. Do you have a process for creating content or for, just getting like your thoughts out into the world in a way that supports people and kind of points them back to you as an expert?
I do. So, one, content was very uncomfortable for me. And so, you know how the best way to learn is to sort of step into discomfort and just do it. And
Right.
for me, what I've done is I've really taken advantage of the AI tools that we have now, right? So I actually put the chapter of the book that I wrote into
Nice.
AI and then asked a couple of different things. And I I started a series on LinkedIn called Leadership Lessons from Aviation. And that was sort of the basis for it. I also listen to what's out there, listen to the challenges people have. I talk with some of my friends that are managing engineering teams, some of my colleagues who are running companies, and go, what is some of the biggest problems that you see? And I even asked, I did a LinkedIn poll about a month ago just to ask folks, hey, instead of me just kind of assuming what you want to hear, what are some of the problems that you want to hear? And one of them was about delegation. People are really confused.
Yeah.
One of the challenges people have is delegating, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I looked at it from the perspective of, an aircraft and go, okay, how can I think about this? And so you've got a pilot, you've got a co-pilot. The co-pilot has the pilot is ultimately responsible for the aircraft, right? But
Mm-hmm.
the co-pilot has certain responsibilities, and everybody else in the crew, depending on what kind of aircraft it is and what the crew is, everybody else in the crew has responsibilities that they're responsible for, and they've been effectively delegated. And I thought about that and just wrote an article about it. There are a lot of ways to get ideas. I skim through LinkedIn myself, and look at somebody. It's like, that was a great post. Let me see how I can add some value to that or create
Mm-hmm.
something that's add value. So I'll take that post, put it into AI, and just ask, hey, is there something here that I can relate to my that I can build a leadership lessons from aviation post. Now, you know how it is with AI. You get about 75 to 80% there. I mean, if you just cut and paste whatever AI comes up with, I don't I'm not going to do that, right? I'm at least going to read it. I think
Hmm.
it's getting better and better. But then I have something to work from. So I'm spending less and less time now doing those posts because I got into a routine. So just if you want to know about my process, I have a funnel and I have a specific thing that I do on Monday every day of the week, and I take the weekends off. I do something specific every day of the week, but I do take a block. I block an hour once a week to do all my posts for the following week, and it's enough time.
Yeah. No, I'm a big fan of that time blocking. We do a version of that. So we've got like these two concurrent processes, right? That they mirror one another, and one of them is the process for content creation for our agency, our own marketing and all that stuff. And then there's the concurrent kind of mirrored version that we use for all of our clients' content. Now we have a team that is supporting both of those much more heavily so on our clients project side, right? Like for example, I mean, I'm creating 80% of the content for our agency and for the podcast. I'm writing all the newsletters and I'm writing the social copy for the content. We've got a team that's making images and editing video and stuff. But it's a very similar process where I actually take like 3 or 4 hours once a month to write all of the newsletter content. We do a weekly newsletter. And so I'm writing all of that once a month because it's just so much easier to sit down and say, look, for this period of time, I am in this this headspace, right? I'm writing. And of course, I've already got ideas. And then from that, we turn that into social media content, email marketing content, so on and so forth. But it all happens in 3 or 4 hours a month, right? So I always encourage folks that don't feel like you have to commit yourself to doing this thing every single day, unless that's how you want to do it, right? You can certainly batch create content once a week, once a month, and it can be just as, if not more effective.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes I'll just get, and I'm sure it happens to you too, just get inspired.
Oh,
You
yeah.
just think about something. I
Yeah.
go, oh, you know what? I can write a post about that. And if I have a block of time, I'll just do it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So we can all be inspired by different things.
Right.
You can be inspired by something you see on your drive, on your drive out to go eat and back or something like that, or while you're at the gym, whatever you're doing. So there's all sorts of ways to do it. So I just take whatever opportunities I can if I'm thinking of different and engaging content to get it written down. And Apple Notes,
Yeah.
iOS Notes is the best thing ever as far as I'm concerned, right? Because I have the Apple ecosystem, a
Right. Same.
laptop and the phone, so everything sort of talks to each other. So I use those notes extensively so that I don't forget anything.
I, I'm right there with you. I use a tool called Evernote, it's just an old,
Yeah, I know that one.
yeah, note taking tool. Same thing. It's on my, it's on my desktop. It's on uh, uh, my phone. I mean, I have an iPhone as well. I made a joke one time. I said the only place or I tend to have a lot of ideas. I mentioned to a client, I think, and we're just in a discussion. Yeah, it was a client, and I said, I've got all these ideas, and they always tend to come to me in the shower, and so I'm losing these ideas in the shower. And like a week or so later, I got a package in the mail, and it was a shower. You can hang it in the shower. It was a whiteboard with a little, marker that goes in there, and it said, "Never
That's
lose
awesome.
another one of those great ideas." And it was that client sent it to me. So I've got a little whiteboard hanging in my shower. So if I've got a good idea, I just go scribble it on there for later. So
That is awesome. There's one other tool I use called Audio Pen.
okay,
You can just talk into it, random, so how many of us have random musings?
right, right,
It'll collate all my random musings and spit something out that's logical. It's actually
yeah.
pretty amazing.
I have done that. That was another. I've done that for years. When I was driving, I used to drive a lot more than I do these days. You and I were talking about this
Yeah.
before we started. I've got a home office. You're working out of a home office, but I used to drive into Atlanta, which for us is about a 40 or 50 mile drive, which depending on the day and the time could mean 40 or 50 minutes or 2.5 hours, right? So I used to have all this drive time, and I dictated so many notes into my phone that, in the moment are just ramblings, right? But they served as a starter for content, when it was time for me to sit down and write it out. So I used Evernote for that as well. And I'd pull that up, and it would be full of a bunch of ums and ahs, right? But I can kind of skim through it and pull out the nuggets that actually made sense. Sometimes I'd look at that and say, well, this was a terrible idea. I don't know what I was thinking, right? But at least it's there, right? It gets filtered through that process. But anyway, well, Ron, I did have one more question I was really eager to ask. And so, look, we've talked about your journey from the Navy into leadership and leadership consulting, and you've got this great content series about lessons from naval aviation. And if you were to pick out like your favorite or your one takeaway that listeners to this episode would be able to utilize that tip, and it's going to make their leadership job, their leadership better tomorrow, what would that one lesson be?
Well, it goes like this: have a plan. And this comes from aviation, right? Nobody gets in an airplane and just goes up and kind of flies around, right? There's always a plan. Have a plan, but be ready when things don't go according to plan, right? Because things rarely do. Because I think we all know people who just get, when their plans go off the rails, they freeze, they can't do anything. And the reality is, in an airplane, when you take off, you really don't know where you're going to land, right? I mean, you have some plans, but you do. And especially, in the environment that I was in, off of aircraft carriers, right? So now you've got your landing area,
Right.
your airport is moving, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your airport could run into problems, bad weather, rough seas, things like that. But bottom line is, have a plan, right? But be ready when things don't go according to plan.
I love that lesson. It reminds me of my favorite quote of all time from the great philosopher Mike Tyson, who said, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face,
Right.
which is a much more colloquial way of putting that. Have a plan, but be prepared when things don't go according to plan. I think that is phenomenal. Well, Ron, I can't thank you enough for being a part of the Grow Rogue podcast. You have shared some really helpful lessons with our audience. I wish you the very best in the future. I hope we can stay connected. And for those who are watching this on YouTube, I'd ask you to please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment. Let us know what your favorite takeaway was from this episode. And we hope to see you all on the very next episode of the Grow Rogue podcast. Thank you.